Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I studied art history in college with a focus on European decorative arts and fashion from the 13th to 17th centuries. Everyone told me it was useless, but I didn't care because I genuinely loved it. After graduation, I bounced around a few museum gift shops and galleries before landing a job at this high-end jewelry store. The owner saw my resume and thought my background would help with customer education and authenticity when discussing pieces. She was right, I've been there for about 3 years now. The job itself is incredible. I get to spend every single day surrounded by precious metals and gemstones. We carry everything from contemporary designs to vintage pieces and some genuine antiques. I can spot a Victorian mourning brooch from across the room, and I've memorized the histories of basically every major jewelry style from medieval Europe. The owner encourages me to share this knowledge with customers. Turns out people really enjoy learning that jade symbolizes purity and protection in Chinese culture, or that garnets were worn by crusaders as protection. It makes the purchase feel more meaningful, and we've built up quite a few repeat customers because of it. The only downside to this otherwise perfect job was my manager. Her name was Susie, and she was absolutely two-faced. In front of customers, she was all sweetness and charm, warm smiles and helpful suggestions and endless patience. The second they walked out the door, though, she would completely transform. It was like watching someone flip a switch. She would immediately start tearing into whoever was nearby. Her favorite hobby was talking to customers while making passive-aggressive comments about us employees within earshot. She would compliment a customer's necklace and then look at me and say something about how some people just don't understand how to accessorize properly. Or she would praise a customer's color choices while mentioning that certain complexions really shouldn't wear certain metals. Always directed at whichever employee was in range. For some reason, she seemed to have a grudge against me. I think it bothered her. The customers would seek me out and ask questions. They would come back and request to work with me because I had helped them before. I would chat with them about the history of their pieces or share little facts about gemstones and metalwork techniques. One woman came back 4 times in 2 months just to hear more stories while she browsed. Susie hated that. I dressed extremely plainly at work on purpose. Simple black suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back neatly. Nothing fancy. This was deliberate because if I'm being honest, I'm a complete geek when it comes to 14th century European court fashion. If I let myself go, I would show up in full medieval regalia every single day. So I kept it simple and professional. One afternoon in early February, Susie completely lost it. We had just finished with a customer, and the moment the door closed, Susie turned on me like a rabid dog. She told me my problem was that I looked absolutely plain and boring. She said I looked like I just rolled out of bed and grabbed whatever was nearby. I mentioned that I dressed according to the company dress code. She shot back that the dress code said business professional, not business funeral. She reminded me that I worked in a jewelry store and needed to look like what the customer wants to look like. She said I needed to inspire them and make them want to buy things. I told her I could look into updating my wardrobe, but she said I should because right now I was dragging down the whole aesthetic of the place. She stormed off to her office and I stood there processing what she had just said. Then it hit me. She wanted me to look like what customers want to look like. She wanted me to dress in a way that would inspire jewelry purchases. Fine, I could absolutely do that. I went home that night and opened my closet. Way in the back behind all my normal work clothes was my collection. The stuff I had accumulated over years of being obsessed with historical fashion, gowns, dresses, accessories. Things I had made myself or commissioned from specialty shops. I pulled out my favorites and started planning. The next day was February 10th. I showed up wearing a deep blue gown with gold embroidery along the neckline and sleeves. I paired it with a vintage gold bracelet from our store's collection and matching earrings. My hair was styled in an elaborate braided updo with small pearl pins throughout. I looked like I had stepped out of a 15th century portrait. The reaction was immediate. Customers kept stopping me to ask about the dress. They wanted to know where I got it and what the inspiration was. They asked if they could take photos. I explained the historical context behind every element. The embroidery pattern was based on Italian Renaissance designs. The silhouette was influenced by French court fashion. The jewelry complemented the gown's era perfectly. People were absolutely fascinated, and they bought things, a lot of things. One woman purchased a pearl necklace because she loved how the pearls in my hair looked. A couple bought matching gold bands when I explained the symbolism of gold in medieval marriage ceremonies. Sales were noticeably higher that day. Susie looked like she was going to explode. I kept it up all week. February 11th, I wore a burgundy velvet dress with silver accessories. February 12th was a green gown with emerald jewelry. February 13th, I did a pink and white ensemble with rose gold pieces. Valentine's Day itself, I went all out with a red gown that had intricate beadwork and ruby jewelry. Every single day, customers would flock to me asking questions and buying items. The owner was in the store that week because Valentine's Day is one of our busiest times. She was thrilled with the sales numbers and kept complimenting my outfits. She even asked if I could put together a lookbook for future marketing materials. Susie tried repeatedly to get me fired. She pulled the owner aside multiple times saying I was violating dress code and being unprofessional. The owner shut her down every time. She told Susie that as long as sales were up and customers were happy, there was no problem. On February 16th, I wore a white dress with silver and pale blue accents. It had this flowing ethereal quality with long sleeves and delicate embroidery. Very winter princess aesthetic, but with an Eastern European influence in the patterns. I paired it with diamond and aquamarine jewelry that made the whole look shimmer. My friend stopped by the store that day and caught me in that outfit. She said later that I looked incredible, but that Susie was standing in the back corner, literally glaring daggers at me the entire time, just radiating pure hatred while I helped customers and made sales. The week ended and I went back to my normal plain work attire. 2 days later, Susie didn't show up for her shift. She didn't call. She didn't send a message. She just never came back. The owner promoted someone else to manager the following week. He had been with the company longer than anyone, and he is honestly pretty chill. He doesn't care what I wear as long as it's professional, and he actively encourages me to engage with customers about jewelry history. I'm perfectly happy with how everything turned out. My parents were the type who'd rather smile through discomfort than cause a scene. That stuck with me through college, through my first job at a nonprofit, and into my relationship with my husband. We met through mutual friends when I was 22. He was kind, funny, and came with a tight-knit group that felt like an instant family. His best friend had a younger sister who was 14 at the time, and she was always around. She'd tag along to group hangouts, movie nights, and eventually even our dates. I thought it was sweet at first. She seemed to look up to my husband like an older brother, and I didn't mind including her. When we got engaged after 2 years of dating, she pulled my husband aside at the party and told him not to forget about her once he became a married man. I thought it was just teenage dramatics. I even asked her to be one of my bridesmaids because she'd become like a little sister to me too. The wedding was beautiful, and everything felt perfect. A few months later, my husband got a job offer across the country, and we moved. It was bittersweet leaving everyone behind, but we were excited to start our new life together. We lost touch with a lot of people, including her. 3 years passed, and honestly, I barely thought about her anymore. Then my husband's best friend called and asked if he and his sister could stay with us for a week while they visited the area. Of course, we said yes. The moment they arrived and she saw my husband, the first words out of her mouth were about how hot he'd gotten and how glad she was that he didn't look like one of those boring married guys. I laughed it off, but something about the way she said it felt off. Over the next few days, she'd constantly find excuses to be near my husband. She'd sit right next to him on the couch Even when there was plenty of space elsewhere, she'd lean into him when they talked. She'd playfully punch his arm and giggle at everything he said. Whenever I joined them, she'd barely acknowledge me. After the third day, I pulled my husband aside and told him I thought she was being a little inappropriate with how close she was getting to him. He asked me what I meant. I explained that the way she was always touching him and ignoring me when I was around was making me uncomfortable. He said she was just being herself and that she'd always been like that, adding that she was just a kid. I pointed out that she was 18 and not a kid anymore. He insisted I was reading too much into it and that she was like his little sister, so there was nothing weird about it. I dropped it because I didn't want to start a fight, but the discomfort didn't go away. On their last night, we decided to throw a small dinner party with a few of our new friends. I was standing with my husband in the kitchen when she walked up and said she needed to steal him for a while. Before I could respond, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the living room where people were playing card games. I watched them go and tried to shake off the frustration building in my chest. Throughout the evening, every time I'd approach my husband, she'd swoop in and drag him away to show him something or ask him to help with something. She'd look back at me and giggle like it was some inside joke. When everyone sat down for dinner, I made sure to sit next to my husband. She came to the table last, looked around, and made a show of scanning for an empty seat. She said there was nowhere for her to sit, then walked over and plopped herself down on my husband's lap. The entire table went silent. I felt my face go hot. My husband told her to stop acting like a kid while laughing, reminding her she wasn't a kid anymore. She giggled and got up, moving to another chair while looking at me with this smug little smile. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out. I got in my car and just drove. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I felt like I was going to either scream or cry. I ended up at a friend's house and stayed there. About an hour later, my phone started blowing up. My husband called asking where I was and saying everyone was asking about me. I told him I was at my friend's place and would come back after she was gone. He asked if I was serious. I said yes and hung up. I came home the next afternoon after they'd left. My husband was furious. He said I'd made everything so awkward and asked if I knew how embarrassing it was. I told him I was uncomfortable and that she'd been disrespecting me all week while he did nothing. He asked how she disrespected me and said she was just joking around, insisting she was like his sister. I said I didn't care what she was to him and that sitting on his lap crossed a line, but he just laughed it off. He said I sounded ridiculous and that it was just a joke. I told him it wasn't funny to me and that I didn't want her in the house again. He looked at me like I just said something unforgivable. He asked if I was giving him an ultimatum. I said if it meant he'd actually respect my feelings, then yes. He started packing a bag. He said he couldn't be with someone this insecure, someone who thought disgusting things about him and her. I tried to explain that I never said he did anything wrong and that I only said she was disrespectful, but he was already out the door. Then I got a text from her saying she was really sorry if she'd made me feel insecure and that she'd try to make me feel better next time. She added that leaving like that was pretty childish and that I'd kind of ruined the night. I didn't respond. Later, her brother texted me calling me every name in the book, saying I didn't deserve my husband and that I should be alone. I cried for hours. I sent apology after apology to my husband, but he ignored every single one. Then I called one of the guys who'd been at the dinner, someone who was friends with both of us. He told me that after I left, his girlfriend and a few others told her she'd been way out of line. She cried and said they were attacking her over a silly joke. He also told me she'd always had boundary issues. Then my husband's mom called asking what was going on because he wouldn't tell her anything. I hesitated, but I told her everything. She was silent for a moment, then her voice went cold. She said they were coming over and that they needed to talk to him. So now I'm sitting here waiting for them to arrive. I don't know if I was wrong. I don't know if this can be fixed, but I do know I'm done saying sorry for having boundaries. I spent most of my 20s with my nose buried in textbooks and working part-time jobs just to get through college. Dating wasn't even on my radar back then. When I finally graduated and landed my first real job at a logistics company, I was 24 and hadn't been on a date in almost 4 years. My co-workers would talk about their dating app adventures during lunch breaks, and after hearing the same stories for weeks, I figured maybe it was time to put myself out there. That's how I ended up downloading the app everyone kept mentioning. For the first week, I swiped through profiles without much happening. Most conversations fizzled out after a few messages. Then I matched with this woman who looked incredible on paper. We started messaging right away, and she mentioned she was in town visiting family for the weekend. I always checked social media profiles before meeting anyone to make sure they were real, and everything looked legitimate. Her photos matched across multiple platforms, and she had hundreds of friends. We exchanged numbers and started talking on the phone every night after my shifts ended around 11 p.m. She told me she worked full-time at a retail management position, had her own apartment, and drove her own car. I couldn't believe someone like that was single and interested in me. We talked for 2 weeks straight, sometimes for hours at a time. She'd tell me about her day and ask about mine. It felt natural and easy. When our schedules finally lined up, we agreed to meet that Friday. I drove my beat-up '96 Honda Civic about 45 minutes to her town. The car was on its last legs, but it got me there. We went to dinner at some chain restaurant I can't even remember now, because I was so nervous. She looked exactly like her photos, which was a relief. We talked about work and our families and what we wanted out of life. Everything seemed perfect. The next morning, we got breakfast at Waffle House around 9 a.m. She did have an apartment, but it was right next door to her grandmother's place. I had to meet her grandmother that morning, which caught me off guard. The grandmother kept asking me questions about my job and my intentions with her granddaughter. While we were sitting in her living room, she casually mentioned her car was actually in her grandmother's name. Then she said her apartment lease was in her cousin's name. I asked why, and she said it was complicated with her credit history. She showed me family photos with this cousin, and they looked close. She talked about her abusive ex and how he'd ruined her credit and made it hard for her to get things in her own name. She even walked me through her apartment and apologized for the state of her laundry room. It was completely infested with flies and roaches crawling on the walls. She said the landlord kept promising to fix it but never did. Something in my gut told me this was all strange. But I was excited because this was my first real relationship in years. We changed our relationship status on social media that same day. Her friends started commenting congratulations and welcome to the family. Then she told me she needed to confess something important. She said she'd actually been fired from her retail job about a week earlier. I felt my stomach drop. I asked what happened and reminded her she'd just told me yesterday she was working full-time. She admitted she knew but was too embarrassed to say anything. She explained her grandma and dad had been helping her with rent and bills. I asked what her plan was moving forward. She said her car payment of $275 was due that Monday and asked if I could help. I told her I couldn't do that because I just started my job 3 months ago and was still building my savings back up. She started crying and said she understood but then mentioned she could get a payday loan. She explained she could have the loan deposited into my checking account and I could just give her the cash. I said that sounded really sketchy and asked if there was another way to do this. She said she couldn't use her grandma or dad's accounts because they've both been burned by payday loan companies before and refused to help her this way. I said I didn't know about this and that it didn't feel right. She kept crying and begged me to help. She promised she'd pay everything back within 2 weeks when she got her first paycheck from a new job she was interviewing for. I sat there for a long time thinking about it. Finally, I called my bank where I'd had an account since high school graduation. I opened a second linked checking account over the phone. The bank representative walked me through the process and warned me about scams. I brushed it off and said I knew what I was doing. I gave her the new account number and routing number. By Sunday morning, she'd contacted some payday loan company based in Alabama. She said they were one of the few that still operated even though payday loans were banned in our state. The loan amount of $1,800 appeared in my linked checking account by noon. I met her at a coffee shop and handed over the cash in an envelope. She hugged me and thanked me repeatedly. She promised to pay it back within 2 weeks maximum. I drove home Monday morning with a bad feeling sitting heavy in my chest. I tried to shake it off and focus on work. Wednesday afternoon, she called me while I was on my lunch break. She sounded excited and said she gotten hired at a new retail position starting that weekend. I asked if that meant she could pay back the payday loan with her first paycheck. She said absolutely, and that she'd already worked out a payment plan. I felt relieved. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday, I checked my bank account and saw a charge of $47 from the payday loan company. I immediately called my bank to ask what was going on. They explained it was an automatic payment that had been set up. I called her right away and she apologized. She said there must have been a miscommunication with the loan company. I told the bank I wasn't the person who signed the loan and terminated the automatic payment. They flagged my account and said they'd investigate. We agreed to meet again on Memorial Day weekend, which was coming up in 2 weeks. She told me not to worry because her dad had given her a check for the full loan amount of $1,800. She said she'd deposit it into my bank at a branch near her place. I asked if she was absolutely sure the check was good. She promised it was and said her dad felt terrible about everything and wanted to help fix the situation. She even showed me a photo of the check on her phone. I should have asked more questions, but I wanted to believe her. I let her deposit the check on Friday afternoon right before the Memorial Day weekend started. The bank teller told me the check would clear by Tuesday because of the holiday. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That weekend, I actually relaxed for the first time in weeks. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday, I checked my account again. There was another charge of $47 from the payday loan company, plus an additional $35 in penalty fees. Then I saw that the $1,800 check had bounced. My account was now negative by over $200. I tried calling her immediately, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I sent text messages asking what was going on. Nothing. I checked social media and realized she'd blocked me on everything. I called my bank in a panic and explained I was a victim of fraud. The representative put me on hold for 20 minutes. When they came back, they told me they were closing all my accounts as a security measure. Within hours, my main checking account where my paychecks were deposited was closed. My savings account with $800 I'd been saving for a new car was closed. The linked checking account was obviously closed too. I couldn't access any of my money. I had to call my mom and ask to borrow money just to buy groceries that week. My best friend from college started doing some investigating online. He found out she had 2 of every social media account. One set of accounts she'd shared with me where she looked single and available. Another set of accounts where she had a whole boyfriend and a completely different life. He sent me screenshots of everything. That cousin and all the family photos she'd shown me was actually her boyfriend since high school. His name was all over her other social media accounts. My friend explained the boyfriend was currently in prison for check fraud and identity theft. She'd been visiting him at least once a month based on her check-ins at the correctional facility. They had posts about getting married when he got out in 2 years. I felt sick to my stomach. Everything had been a lie from the start. My mom and my friend both told me I needed to press charges immediately. I contacted my bank and requested all the documentation. They mailed me a copy of the bounced check within a few days. When I opened the envelope and looked at the check, the account holder name wasn't her father's name like she'd claimed, it was her boyfriend's name. She'd somehow gotten access to his account or stolen one of his checks. I decided right then I wasn't going down without a fight. I remembered her apartment had that serious roach and fly infestation in the laundry room. While I was filing police reports and going through legal channels to press fraud charges, I found the phone number for her apartment complex online. I called and left a detailed message with the property management company. I explained that both her apartment and her grandmother's apartment next door were infested and creating a health hazard. I mentioned the roaches, the flies, and the general unsanitary conditions. Within a week, my friend sent me a screenshot of her begging for help on social media. She'd posted asking if anyone had temporary housing available for her and her grandmother. She said they'd been evicted with only 3 days' notice, and her parents refused to let them move in. People in the comments were asking what happened, and she kept deleting the questions. Then the payday loan company started calling me constantly. They'd call 5 or 6 times a day starting at 8 a.m. She'd given them my phone number instead of hers when she set up the loan. They hadn't received a single payment, and the loan was now almost 60 days overdue. For weeks, I just let the calls go to voicemail, but one day I was fed up and answered. I explained to the representative exactly what had happened. I told them she'd fraudulently used my checking account without my knowledge of what I was actually agreeing to. The representative got quiet for a moment and then transferred me to their legal department. A woman from legal got on the phone and said this situation was very interesting to them. She explained that her grandmother and her father already owed their company money from previous payday loans. I asked if they were serious. She confirmed that both family members had outstanding debts. The amounts weren't huge separately, but combined with my case, they had enough to prove she was the one orchestrating everything. She'd been using her family members' accounts and information to take out loans with no intention of ever paying them back. The legal department asked if I'd be willing to provide evidence. I said absolutely. I handed over everything I had collected. Text messages where she promised to pay me back and said her dad was helping. The bounced check with her boyfriend's name on it. My bank statements showing all the charges and the bounced deposit. Screenshots of her 2 sets of social media accounts. Phone records showing all our conversations. Everything. They thanked me and said they'd be in touch. 3 months later, I got a call from a detective. They'd arrested her on multiple charges of fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Her grandmother and father had also been arrested, but they both immediately took plea deals in exchange for turning over evidence against her. They provided documentation showing she'd forced them to open accounts and take out loans under threat of being kicked out of their homes. The grandmother admitted her granddaughter had been stealing her Social Security checks. The father admitted she'd taken out credit cards in his name without permission. I didn't have to testify at trial, but I kept myself informed through the detective and court records. During the trial, more victims came forward. She'd run the same scam on at least 4 other men she'd met through dating apps. The total amount of fraud was over $15,000. Her grandmother had a minor heart attack when she was initially arrested at her apartment. Then during the trial, she had a more severe heart attack in the courtroom. An ambulance took her away, and I never found out if she survived. Despite her lawyers arguing she had a troubled past and mental health issues, she was convicted on multiple counts. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison. She'd be eligible for parole after serving 8 years minimum. Her boyfriend got additional charges added to his sentence for his involvement with the stolen checks. He wouldn't be getting out anytime soon either. I finally got my bank account sorted out after about 6 months of back and forth. But I lost that $800 I'd been saving because the bank said the fraudulent activity made it impossible to verify which transactions were legitimate. My first relationship in 4 years turned out to be an elaborate scam, but at least she's behind bars now, probably in a facility not far from where her boyfriend is locked up. They can plan that wedding from their separate cells. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.